Dude, what the
What happened?
That's hella creepy.
This mannequin over here, we came in here one night, it literally moved. Something about that big has been seen in this room. It can get real weird in here. John Moore actually was in here for murdering his aunt and uncle. And I noticed there was a pink mark on my face, about that big around. It felt like a burn. She poisoned her stepdaughter. Her first husband mysteriously died also. She was held in here. Her name was Ray Krause. There's times that I don't feel like being in here.
The door closed behind us, dude. Scratch marks, troll stock.
Twice? 2 different devices. Eli.
Oh my demon.
It was a demonic name that had all these other demonic entities working for it, I guess.
Look at that energy. Who is it on the ground?
Look at the corner right here.
And this face with no pupils.
That's insane. Oh no.
People have said they will not return because of that hole.
Yep, because they feel like it's portal.
The urban legends of the Mexico City subway. It's called La Niña Caníbal. There was an 8-year-old girl named Rosarita Sanchez Sierra. She was with her mom and they were navigating the Tacubaya station on line 1 during rush hour. So you can imagine it's obviously mad packed with mad people. It got to a point where she let go of her mom's hand and tried her best to get past the crowd, but she just got overwhelmed and scared. And once her mom realized that Rosa was gone, immediately she told the police at the train station, but they couldn't find her. So at this point, they're just thinking she could be long gone by now, since they couldn't just stop the subway from going. But now there was police in every single station doing searches. And then there were civilians saying that they were seeing mutilated bodies with a girl taking bites of the bodies and shit. But they didn't know if it was that same girl that got lost. 3 weeks after she was lost, police found her in a tunnel, but she didn't look like she was dying of hunger, thirst, anything. She looked perfectly normal. Police asked her what happened or where she's been these past couple weeks, and then that's when she says, I saw this homeless man who had fell off the tracks. He injured his leg. That ended up the reason why he died. Then she saw rats eating the corpse, and then her being hungry, she ended up following what the rats did. So she ended up eating parts of the homeless man, and then she would go back, hide in the tunnels, go back to the body whenever she was hungry, take bites, and then go back.
But she's basically acting like a rat.
Yeah.
That's literally what a rat does.
And also it's because she's...
In January 2013, 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson walked into his high school gym in Georgia and never walked out. Hours later, his body was discovered, rolled up inside a vertical wrestling mat upside down, his face swollen beyond recognition. Authorities quickly ruled it an accident, claiming Kendrick had fallen headfirst into the mat while trying to retrieve a shoe. They said he got stuck and suffocated, but the evidence told a different story. Kendrick's body showed signs of blunt force trauma, injuries too severe to be explained away by a simple fall. His internal organs had mysteriously been removed and replaced with newspaper before the second autopsy, something the funeral home blamed on standard practice, but many believed it was an attempt to hide the truth. And then there was the missing footage. Hours of security camera recordings inside the gym, gone. The official story? The cameras were out of sync. But to Kendrick's family, it sounded like something much worse, a cover-up. Over the years, lawsuits were filed, investigations reopened, and rumors swirled. Some said Kendrick had gotten into a fight with students connected to powerful families, and that what happened inside the gym was no accident. Despite the evidence, despite the outrage, no one has ever been charged in Kendrick Johnson's death. And today, the case remains one of the most haunting and suspicious unsolved deaths in recent American history. Because Kendrick Johnson didn't just fall into the mat, he was hidden inside it.
I've never cried harder than when I read this book. It's about the life and untimely death of 12-year-old Andy Brewer. She was kidnapped from her home in Arkansas on May 15th, 1999 by someone she should have been able to trust, her uncle, Carl Roberts. Carl would go on to sexually assault and murder Andy, leaving her in the woods for 3 days until she was found. And while her mom, Rebecca, was pleading for answers and finding her little girl, he looked her in the eyes and lied about what he did to her. Rebecca wrote this book to try and heal from the loss of losing Andy, and she details everything from finding out Andy was missing to those excruciating 3 days before she was found, and then to planning her little girl's funeral, and that's something that nobody should have to say, let alone live through. This book broke me in ways that I cannot even put into words. With each page, I feel like I cried a little bit more, and my face would literally turn hot with sadness. But through all the heartbreak that's in this book, you also get to learn who Andy was. And my gosh, was she a beautiful, kind, and responsible little girl who loved life. I truly don't think a story has ever stayed with me as much as Andy's, and that just proves how strong her mom's words are. Rebecca is literally carrying on Andy's legacy in such a significant way just by telling her story. One thing that I love is that Rebecca includes pictures of Andy throughout this book, so you really get to see who she was. There were many times that I had to stop reading to kind of sit back and really realize the gravity of what happened to Andy. Rebecca included Carl's written confession of what he did to her, and I'm not going to lie, it's one of the most horrific things that I've ever read. Absolutely nobody should have to go through what Andy did, and the fact that she was just a little girl, it's so heartbreaking. This book embodies grief and what it means to lose someone who is your entire world, the person who made you a mom. It proves that grief is not linear and it affects people differently, and it affects more people than you probably realize. And although this book is incredibly sad, Rebecca shares how she's moved forward with her life and how Andy is always at the center of whatever decision she makes. And let me tell you, Rebecca has gone on to do such amazing advocacy work for other families who have gone through the same thing as her. She is the definition of turning your pain into purpose. Rebecca is truly so kind, and I've only ever gotten to talk to her over email, but she deserves everything good this world has to offer. One thing that Rebecca made very clear in this book is that Andy is more than just what happened to her, and the entire world should know who she is. So please, if you can, go read this book and support Andy's mom. It would mean the world to me and to her if everyone could learn about Andy. She was a beautiful little girl who should still be here today.
Imagine loving someone so much you agree to let them kill you. Honestly, if I didn't know this was a real true crime case, I would think this was a far-fetched horror film. It was August 2012 in Dublin in Ireland. Elaine O'Hara was a lovely lady who actually had a really rough childhood. She had many mental and physical health issues from an early age, and bullies honestly saw her as a bit of an easy target. She had depression, BPD, diabetes, dyslexia, and just really struggled. She had to even be hospitalized at some points due to her mental health, and this was made even worse when her mum passed away in 2002. Then she was literally kicked while she was down when her doctor died too, who she'd become really close to. She made some attempts to unalive herself, which were thankfully unsuccessful. She really was a fighter. She was trying to battle through these hard times. She wanted a better life for herself. She worked hard as a childcare assistant to earn some money and was also taking some classes to try and get a job as a qualified teacher. But she was really lonely. She felt like she was kind of missing something from her life. She really wanted a romantic partner. She thought that maybe finding a partner would bring her back some joy in her life, but she couldn't have been more wrong. Suddenly, totally out of the blue, on the 22nd of August 2012, after a stint in a mental health institution, Elaine just vanished. She'd left her bag and her belongings at her home, and CCTV showed her leaving of her own accord. Did this mean that she'd intentionally gone off and unalived herself somewhere? Everyone's fears seemed to be confirmed when her car was found abandoned by some local cliffs. And the search for Elaine seemed to slow at this point. It almost was like everyone honestly kind of just accepted that she'd probably done this to herself. All of the evidence was kind of pointing in that direction. But roughly a year later, an alarming discovery was made. Two men who were in the local area stumbled upon a rucksack lying in the water in a reservoir in County Wicklow. And this was only really visible because it had been quite warm at the time, so the water was slightly lower than usual. It was kind of a fluke. This bag shouldn't have been visible. But the items inside that the men found were incredibly disturbing. Along with just some normal clothing, there was a gag and some restraints. Now, really worried about what they'd found, they took the items and handed them in to the local police and told them where they'd found them. Police then headed back there and found even more worrying items, including handcuffs, a mask, and a knife. Then they found an ID card, and this belonged to Elaine. So they decided to get the water search team in, and lo and behold, they found two phones under the water. Meanwhile, a local woman was walking her dog, and the dog made another alarming discovery. The dog had picked up some kind of bones that initially the woman thought were just animal bones, but on closer inspection, they just didn't seem like it. So she reported this to authorities, who later tragically confirmed that they belonged to Elaine. Clearly something horrific had gone on here. This wasn't just a standard self-unaliving. Investigators trawled through electronic devices and found some really questionable websites that Elaine had been browsing on. She'd been in communications with a man called Graham Dwyer. Now, I've read a lot about Graham, and some reports say that he seemed like a normal guy, and some reports say that ex-girlfriends kind of had a bit of a bad feeling about him. He didn't really seem to have massive warning signs prior to this, though. He had no known criminal history, and seemingly had had some fairly normal relationships. He worked as an architect and enjoyed driving luxury cars. He actually owned at one point the same car that I have, an Audi TT. He also owned a Porsche 911, which is one of my absolute dream cars. However, he was in huge financial trouble. He was also shockingly married and also was a dad. They didn't just meet on a normal website. This was an incredibly disturbing website. He had met Elaine on the disturbing website in order to have an affair with her that would satisfy his fantasies. Now, the pair had regularly been meeting up in person as well as exchanging really horrific texts that clearly demonstrated that he had a desire to unalive a woman during the deed. They'd been exchanging and creating homemade videos and calling each other master and slave. It transpired that Graham clearly knew Elaine had recently been in a mental health facility and she was vulnerable. He decided now was the time to strike. He knew that Elaine was into this more kind of extreme intimacy, but I suppose he wanted to see how far he could push it. He knew that he could make this look like she had unalived herself, and he planned to lure her to the cliffs for that reason. He got her to agree to go there of her own accord and then be tied up. He then lived out his biggest, sickest fantasy and then dumped her body. But he wasn't counting on the bag being found along with the disturbing messages that linked him to this abhorrent crime. He was found guilty of murder in 2015 and was given life in prison.
15-year-old James Gordon picked up a .22 caliber long barrel rifle and executed his entire family. His father, his mother, and his 17-year-old sister. No struggle, no warning, just cold, calculated murder. When questioned, James showed a little emotion. He said he hated them, claiming he was sick of his mother's constant chewing, his sister's annoying accent, and his father's disapproval of his political opinions. After a 6-month trial, James wasn't found guilty. He was found insane. The jury believed he wasn't in his right mind and acquitted him of all charges, sending him to Rusk State Hospital in Texas in 1968. He spent 6 years there before being quietly released back into the world. 2 years later, James disappeared completely. He changed his name, severed ties with his past, and vanished into society. Until 40 years later, James re-emerged, this time as an award-winning professor of psychology. He had built an entirely new life, one filled with accolades, recognition, and students who admired him. But when his real identity was uncovered, it sent shockwaves through the community. Even the mayor called for his removal, labeling him a murderer hiding in plain sight. But the university refused. They stood by him, saying he had served his time and that the man he used to be no longer existed. This case is as disturbing as it is surreal. A teenager killer who butchered his own family, now shaping young minds in a classroom. It makes you wonder, how well do we ever really know the people around us?
Shortly after that video was posted on TikTok, the 14-year-old girl who took the video, named Scarlett Vickers, would be murdered by her own father. Scarlett was your average girl living in the United Kingdom. But sadly, on July 5th, 2024, she would end up dead. Now, initially, Scarlett's 50-year-old father, Simon, claimed that he and his daughter had been having a play fight in the kitchen. They were throwing objects at each other, he said, and he accidentally grabbed a knife and threw it at his daughter, and that's how she died. It was a big accident. But authorities called bullshit. You see, Scarlett had been inflicted with a 4-inch deep stab wound. A stab wound that had punctured her body at a 90-degree angle. There was a lot of contention in the courtroom as Simon tried to defend himself and acted like he was not complicit in his own daughter's murder, but on January 27th, 2025, he was found guilty of killing his own daughter, and he will now be sentenced on February 10th. It's still unclear, though, exactly what happened that evening. Sadly, through all the investigating that authorities did, they couldn't tell exactly what had happened that had caused this situation. Was there a fight? Was there a big argument? Why did Simon stab Scarlett? Those are the details that are still unknown. And since Simon, throughout the trial, refused to share the whole truth with the court, sadly, the reality of this situation was probably taken to the grave with Scarlett. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Courtney, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Haunted dolls.
Oh my god.
It's an old clown doll. The name of the clown is called Clyde the Clown. And it was gifted to this guy, right? And instead of throwing it out, he just kind of, decided to take it home with him. Knowing that previous shit would happen involving this doll. It would move. You would find it in a different spot. He decided to record the doll.
And he catches it move?
Yes.
Let's see this shit.
Footage looks even creepier when sped up to 3 times normal speed.
What the f? He's literally looking at the camera like, I see you, mother. I don't think that could be fake though, cause
why?
It moves mad slow. Also because it didn't do the cheesy move when like it moves like a hand.
And the fact that it's a clown, bro, and it looks like life size. That's one thing that I hate about like.
Oh, it's a big doll. It's not a little doll.
Bro, it's the size of the chair.
This disturbing crime case is going to make you think twice about who you're friends with at school. Christina Paulilla had a rough childhood. Her dad passed away in an accident when she was just 2 years old, and her mum then really struggled with substance abuse. She eventually handed over custody of Christine and her older brother to their grandparents. She was diagnosed with alopecia and poor vision from a young age. Now, sadly, because of this, she was kind of seen at school as an easy target, and she was severely bullied. She had to wear thick glasses to help her see and wigs to cover up her hair loss, and bullies would make fun of her and snatch her wig off, leaving her humiliated. She would desperately try and do her makeup and draw on her eyebrows so that she would fit in. Then, while attending high school in Houston, she actually made friends with some of the popular girls. These girls were Rachel Colorutis and Tiffany Rowell. It kind of seemed like her luck had changed. Suddenly she had these lovely friends who were helping her with fashion, hair, makeup. She was looking great and she had this like newfound confidence. She eventually became the school's Miss Irresistible in 2003. And I think it's actually like looking back a little bit weird that the school had a Miss Irresistible competition, but let me know what you think about that in the comments. She was a far cry from the shy and insecure child she once was. Now, due to her newfound confidence and social life, the 17-year-old girl eventually got a boyfriend, 21-year-old Christopher Snyder. But he was really not the Prince Charming that she was hoping for. He was a known criminal and substance user. And obviously for this reason, her mum was disapproving and so was her friends. They wanted what was best for her and they just felt like he was going to take her down a dark path. And they weren't wrong. Christine ultimately ended up being influenced by him and taking substances herself. And this was just such a real shame because obviously, like I said, she'd had this rough upbringing. She had a real difficult start to life. She'd battled through. She'd got this confidence. They were looking up, but then she just ended up in a bad situation again. Christine and Christopher began having frequent arguments, and one even resulted in Christine staying the night on the front garden of her boyfriend's parents' house. She was apparently enraged by this argument, so much so that she threatened to kill all of the family members. Everyone knew that this relationship was toxic. It was apparently abusive from both parties. On the 18th of July 2003, the couple visited Tiffany's house. Now remember, Tiffany was one of the nice girls that was friends with Christine. She lived in Clear Lake City and she was hanging out with her own boyfriend that night, Marcus, and his cousin Aldebert. Rachel was also there too. So there was the four of them and obviously Christine and Christopher. But unfortunately, Christine and Christopher had a sinister plan for the evening. They actually intended to go to Tiffany's house and steal some substances that they thought she had in her house. But things really didn't go to plan because when the couple showed up, an argument broke out between all of them. The pair were volatile, potentially due to the substance abuse, and for some unknown reason, the couple began shooting frantically. They fired at least 40 times. The four innocent victims all received multiple bullet wounds, and 3 of them were deceased. But at this point, Rachel was still hanging on to life just by a thread. The poor girl actually mustered up some strength amongst the chaos and horror and crawled through a puddle of her own blood to desperately try to reach a phone to get help. However, Christine spotted her. For some reason, she just was not going to let her friend get away, and she callously began beating her to death. Heartbreakingly, Rachel was calling out why as she died. Now, the couple fled the scene immediately after, leaving very little evidence behind. Heartbreakingly, one of the victims, Aldebert, had moved to the area to escape violence in his hometown. The couple fled to a Walgreens where Christine was actually due to start work, and she literally just clocked in as if nothing had happened that day. This was just mere hours after this mass murder. Now, the only real evidence that police had to go off were descriptions of the suspects from eyewitnesses in the neighborhood who saw the two people leave. But frustratingly, police seemed to just initially brush off these deaths as substance related. It would be an agonizing 3 years until the truth was eventually revealed. During this time, the murderous pair had broken up. As I said, they weren't good together, they were very toxic, so it's actually definitely better that they just went their separate ways. And Christopher actually went to prison for stealing a car. Christine, though, wound up in rehab in Texas, and she met a guy there called Stanley Rott. They dated for a while until they got married in March 2005, and he had no idea he'd married a mass murderer. Side note, this actually terrifies me about relationships, like you literally never know who you're letting into your life. It wasn't until Christine saw a news report on TV with a literal police sketch of herself that she came clean to her husband. And what do you think he did in this situation? I would have probably guessed break up with her, come forward and tell the police. No, the pair went into hiding together. They stayed hidden in San Antonio for a year until police received an anonymous tip. Christine was arrested at their motel, and Stanley told police what he knew. Now, Christine tried to pin the murders on her ex, Christopher, but the pair were ultimately both charged with murder. But in another frustrating twist, before police could get their hands on Christopher, in 2006, he took his own life. Christine was found guilty and sentenced to life, and she's never admitted the motive for the crimes, but psychiatrists claim that she may have committed the crimes out of jealousy.
They were found shot to death in the bed of their truck during an overnight camping trip, and a disposable camera found at the scene contained these disturbing last known photos of them. This is the mysterious case of Brandon Rumbaugh and Lisa Guerreri, and it's one that will never not terrify me. On October 17th, 2003, Brandon and Lisa would head out for an overnight camping trip in the small town of Bumblebee, Arizona. The couple had recently got engaged, and they wanted to camp out underneath the stars to celebrate their 1-year anniversary. They lived together in Scottsdale, and originally they were going to go to Disneyland to celebrate, but it was too pricey. So last minute, they decided to recreate their first date and go camping instead. Lisa borrowed her mom's white 2000 F-150 truck and a video camera and told her that they would be back the next day. Now, Lisa's mom almost didn't let them borrow the truck because it was in need of an oil change, but again, last minute, she changed her mind and said it was okay. But she had no idea what was about to happen on this camping trip, or that it was about to become one of Arizona's most chilling unsolved mysteries. So their road trip started. The two had bought a disposable camera before leaving Scottsdale to document their trip, and about halfway there, Lisa's mom called them to see if they had made it to their destination yet. Lisa said no, and that they still had a long way to go, but at this point, everything seemed fine. Lisa's mom said, "Be careful," in which Lisa replied, "I love you," and those were the last words that she would ever tell her mom. What happened after this phone call has never really been explained. So when the next day came and went, and nobody heard from Brandon or Lisa, Lisa's mom immediately knew that something was wrong. They never returned the truck and weren't answering phone calls, so she called everyone she knew and the police to begin looking for them. Brandon's friends knew of the general area where they were supposed to be because they had all gone camping up there before, so they began looking, but initially couldn't find anything. Then they traveled down Bumblebee Road, just off of I-17, and that's when they spotted their truck. Upon getting closer, they found Brandon and Lisa in the bed of their truck, deceased. They were in their sleeping bags and had been shot multiple times in the head. When the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office arrived to the scene, they found 2 items were missing, which were Lisa's keys and the video camera that she had borrowed from her mom. But about 100 feet away from the crime scene, police found the couple's broken disposable camera. It looked like someone had thrown it, and on the camera were the very last photos ever taken of Brandon and Lisa. They were posing in the same bed of the truck that they were killed in. Now, according to Lisa's mom, this final photo of Lisa seems off. She said that this wasn't Lisa's true smile, and it was almost like she was scared and uncomfortable, but still trying to smile anyway. But there was one final photo taken on the camera, and it is really disturbing to me. The final photo taken on the camera is pretty overexposed, and you can really only make out the corner of the image. At first, authorities didn't know what the image was of, but they discovered that it was an image of the inside of an old restaurant in Bumblebee. But what doesn't make sense to me is that this was taken after the final photos of the couple, meaning whoever took this picture was likely their killer, and it was taken after they were killed. This is really scary to me because it seems like if this is accurate, the killer took their camera from the crime scene, took the photo inside the restaurant for whatever reason, and then returned the camera to the crime scene. Why would anyone do all of that? It doesn't make sense to me, and it's one of the most disturbing things about this case. Police believe that Brandon and Lisa were either asleep or getting ready to go to sleep when they were attacked, and there was evidence that Lisa woke up at some point during the murders. There was one item found at the scene that contained DNA, possibly of the killer, but what that was has not been publicly identified. Police ruled out a murder-suicide, and there was no evidence of a robbery gone wrong or any sexual assault. And there were no drugs or alcohol involved in the killings either, so it's left many wondering what truly happened to them and why. This seems incredibly random, and it's terrifying. The area where they went camping just off of Bumblebee Road is pretty popular now, but it wasn't back then. Their campsite was extremely desolate and in a pretty remote part of the desert near the Bradshaw Mountains. You would think that you would feel safe out there completely alone, but someone was lurking out there waiting for them. And it makes me wonder if this was a wrong place, wrong time type of situation. Maybe they saw something that they weren't supposed to see out there. It's really similar to the movie Wolf Creek, which is loosely based on the true story of Ivan Milat, who killed 7 people randomly as they backpacked through the remote wilderness. As much as they investigated, police never found who killed Brandon and Lisa. But one thing did come up early in the investigation that stood out to me. Just the night before they left on their trip, Brandon may have had an argument with an unknown man in the doorway of their apartment. It was around 10 p.m., and although the man has never been identified, he was reportedly in his 40s, tall and husky, and he was wearing a white t-shirt and blue jeans. It's not known what they were arguing about or if they even knew each other. And just a month after the murders, police announced that they were looking for information about or from this person, but they never said if he was considered a suspect or not. Brandon and Lisa had no enemies. Since this was seemingly so random, many people have questioned if serial killer Israel Keyes could have been responsible. Israel Keyes murdered 11 people, but is suspected to have killed many more. He started in 1998 and never really had an MO. He targeted random people who just so happened to cross his path, and he would often strike in parks and campgrounds. He was active during the time that Brandon and Lisa were murdered, and one of the scariest things about Israel is that he would plant kill kits around the US that contained murder weapons, so he was truly random about who he killed. He didn't have a specific profile, but this is just a theory and has never been officially connected. Although their case is still open, it remains unsolved 21 years later, and whoever killed Brandon and Lisa is still out there.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This YouTuber was murdered by her own father in an honor killing. Tiba al-Ali was originally from Iraq but moved to Turkey in 2017 at the age of 17 and has lived there for the past 6 years with her boyfriend. While she lived in Turkey, she began a YouTube channel and blogged her life and managed to gain around 34,000 subscribers. But even though Tiba seemed to love her new life, her father back in Iraq was not too happy with her decision to leave and not come back. And on January 2023, she went back to Iraq to attend an event and see some of her family, but while she was there, her father kidnapped her, drugged her, and then strangled her in her sleep. He later said that he did this to wash away the shame she had brought to the family. He eventually turned himself in, but apparently he won't be serving much time in prison. And this is because the penal code in Iraq allows judges to impose lenient sentences on people who kill for honorable motives.
Okay, so Kanye West might actually be a clone. Okay, so we all know how Kanye has been in the news for a while now, but not too long ago, he disappeared for a while and came back looking completely different. Just look at this photo. He looks like 2 different people. He really doesn't even look like Kanye anymore. Kanye also said if he ever disappeared and came back and was acting different, it's not him, and that's exactly what happened. How could somebody be everywhere to nowhere so quickly? It's all a little too sketchy, and here's the video of Kanye saying, if I disappear and come back, it's not me.
Yeah. What have you got to say to people that are trying to cancel you? You can't cancel him. I'm here. That's right. You're here. here doing a big. We ain't going nowhere, baby. We've been here for years. If I ever went anywhere, we know why. You understand what I'm saying? So we here. Exactly. Kanye, any words on Bitcoin? Forget paparazzi. Let's get bodyguard.
Killed my great-grandmother for $155 when I was only 13. I'm Antonio A. Barbeau, and with my friend Nathan Pape, we planned to kill my great-grandmother in order to steal her money. I asked my mother to drop my friend and me off at my great-grandmother's like every weekend, but this weekend my intentions were different and I had brought an axe. When we arrived, we tried to enter quietly, but she saw us, so we acted normally and she invited us into her home. Once inside, without hesitation, the moment she turned around, I hit her 27 times with an axe. She tried to defend herself as best she could, but as she was old, she didn't have enough strength and didn't succeed. Once finished, we left her body in the garage and stole jewelry and money to buy drugs and pizza. But unfortunately, 2 days later, my grandmother found her mother's body in the garage. It didn't take them long to deduce that it was us, so they arrested us and sentenced us to life imprisonment. Tell me, would you do something like that for money?
I rage quitted at a professional esports tournament and shot 2 people to death. I'm David Katz, and here's my story. I was a 24-year-old professional Madden player from Baltimore, Massachusetts. I was extremely good, and in August of 2018, I went on a trip to Jacksonville for a tournament. In 2017, I embarked on a professional playing career, and over the course of the next 3 years, I amassed a substantial fortune of $10,000. The Jacksonville tournament commenced in the morning, and unfortunately, things didn't unfold favorably for me this time. I played a few matches and lost every single one of them. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't used to performing so poorly. I was eliminated from the tournament and had no chance of winning. Fueled by anger, I declined to shake hands with the other competitors and decided to leave. I grabbed one of my handguns that I had taken with me to Jacksonville and walked back to the venue. I was sick of losing, especially as the other players seemed to revel in mocking me, intensifying my anger. I decided to enter the building and opened fire on everyone in there. When it was all said and done, I had killed 2 people and injured 10 others. I then put the gun to my head and took my own life.
This man pushed his pregnant wife off a cliff and it was all caught on camera. 41-year-old Hakan and his pregnant wife, 32-year-old Semra, went to Butterfly Valley in Muğla, southern Turkey, where he took her to the top of the cliff and then he pushed her off. Semra, who was 7 months pregnant, fell 1,000 feet and instantly passed away. But it's been said that Hakan pressured Semra to climb to the top of the cliff even though he knew she was terrified of heights. They took a bunch of photos while they were up there, but little did she know what her husband was about to do. Luckily, there was a family on that cliff at the same time and they were filming the view and happened to catch Hakan and Semra and thought Hakan's demeanor was a little strange. After Semra fell, Hakan asked the stranger to help him look for her and he claimed that she fell on her own. But this stranger said that Hakan looked too calm and like he didn't really care. Hakan's motive was to receive his wife's $25,000 life insurance payout, which he claimed right after her death. He also tried to use the defense that he was mentally disturbed, but this was immediately dismissed and he got life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years.
Okay, so we all know the phrase knocking on wood, right? Well, did you know the disturbing truth behind it? If not, you're about to find out and you're never going to knock on wood again. Okay, knocking on wood is a tradition of literally touching, tapping, or knocking on wood after somebody says they're doing something or intending to do so, in order to avoid a tempting fate after making a favorable prediction or boast, or the hopes of somebody's death. But realistically, knocking on wood is extremely demonic. When you knock on wood, you're just begging a spirit to come and help you with whatever you wanted. Just listen to this priest explain it and promise me you're never going to knock on wood again.
Our lives. I haven't mentioned the practice of knocking on wood. Don't raise your hand. Has anybody ever knocked on wood? Do you know where the practice comes from? It's a Druid practice believing that spirits live in the trees. So when you knock on wood, you're asking the spirit that lives in the tree to come to your aid and to grant your request. Now, if you've ever done that, I'm not saying you're possessed, so don't worry about that. But I just share that as an example of how things that have to do with the occult can become so mainstream
This prison guard fell in love with this inmate and then they escaped together. 40-year-old Casey White had a 75-year sentence for attempted murder, robbery, and was awaiting a murder trial in Alabama. But throughout his time in jail, prison guard 56-year-old Vicky White had an ongoing 2-year relationship with Casey. And not only were they secretly in a relationship, but they had been plotting how to escape together. At this point, Vicky was a supervisor and had worked at the jail for over 25 years, so everyone was shocked when they found out what she did. So on April 29th, 2022, Vicky managed to sneak out of the jail with Casey. She told the other guards that she was taking Casey for a mental health evaluation when she was seen taking him out of his cell, but that appointment didn't exist. Casey and Vicky were on the run for 11 days in total. And on May 9th, police finally found them, and after a long car chase, Vicky took her own life. Investigators found 1,100 phone calls between them and realized that Casey made Vicky believe that he loved her and basically told her everything she wanted to hear. But when Casey was arrested again, he admitted that he had no real intentions with Vicky and that if they managed to escape, he was going to kill her.
Okay, so I'm about to blow your mind with this video. We all know how many people believe Antarctica is not a continent of ice, but rather a giant ice wall surrounding all the continents of the world, and many people believe that if we cross these ice walls, there would be many other continents that have been kept hidden from us. Well, I'm about to show you a couple maps that actually show all the continents being surrounded by an ice wall. Up first is a map from Gleason's new Standard of the World map. And as you can see, it clearly shows an ice wall surrounding all the continents. This was also published in 1892, and Antarctica was found in 1820. Which means they definitely had a better understanding of Antarctica, because they literally founded it 70 years before this map was published. So the real question is, why is it different today? But that's not even the craziest map. Here is the next map, which was leaked from an unknown source, and it's unbelievable. The ice wall is surrounding the continents and extends out to what looks like a bunch of other continents. And oceans, which means other creatures or humanoids are there that are being hidden from us. Let's say this is real. Why is it being hidden from us? Is it for our safety, or is it being hidden for some other sinister reason? I'm very curious to see what everyone thinks about this, so let me know. If you swim in this, you will die.
100% fatality rate. Every motherfucker who ended up in there has died.
You may not believe it, but this guy is 100% correct. Falling into this is basically a death sentence. This TikTok went viral recently of a guy exploring this dam and explaining how every single person that fell into it died. You might be looking at this and thinking, wow, I could definitely swim in this easily. But I'm here to tell you, you can't. You literally have no chance of surviving swimming in this. This dam is located in Pennsylvania, and it's known as the Dock Street Dam. And since 1935, it's taken the lives of 30 people. Granted, this water is not moving very quickly, so it has the illusion of appearing safe. But the way that this wall is built right here is what makes it so deadly. This dam is known as something called a low-head dam. And low-head dams create something known as backwash, which is basically like a washing machine. And if you fall into the water, you're gonna go around in circles until you eventually end up drowning and dying. Backwash is extremely difficult to get out of, so the best course of action here is to stay out of the water. So if you ever see this dam or a dam like it, never go into it.
This musician is one of the worst pedophiles in American history. Meet Carl Logan, a guitar player from Pennsylvania. From 1994 to 2018, Carl Logan was one of the members of the heavy metal band Manowar. He was recognized worldwide for his intense ability to play guitar, and the band Manowar was very popular, selling out shows across the world. Carl Logan was actually such a well-respected guitar player that he ended up selling custom guitars on the band's website, and he even offered a limited number of spots to teach guitar lessons over Skype. But there's a reason why Carl Logan isn't in the band Manowar to this day. On August 9th, 2018, Carl Logan was arrested in North Carolina for allegedly possessing CP or CSAM, and was charged with 6 counts of third-degree exploitation of a minor. According to the authorities, Carl was in possession of a number of disturbing videos. These videos depicted young girls from the ages of 4 to 12 years old engaging in explicit acts with a number of unidentified men. Now, in a federal courtroom, Carl actually admitted that he had downloaded the content and kept it in his possession. And in July of 2022, he was sentenced to only 5.5 years in prison. That means that right now he only has to serve a couple more years in prison before he's going to be released back into the general population. This story is just incredibly disturbing. It goes to show that even people in the limelight, the public spotlight, can do some of the darkest things imaginable. And with cases like this, I always wonder, did they catch the guys who created this content? Where was it coming from? And it's even more disturbing to think about how much of that disgusting shit exists on the internet right now.
Man hired a hitman to kill his wife, but she ended up killing the hitman with her bare hands. On September the 6th, 2006, Susan Kuhnhausen had had a busy shift as an A&E nurse. As she got back to her home in southeast Portland, she saw that a note had been left for her from her husband, Mike. The pair had been married for 18 years, and he left the note to say that he was off to the beach. The 51-year-old then went upstairs when she was met with a terrifying attack. A stranger was hiding behind her door and jumped out and started attacking her with a hammer. Susan had no idea this man was Edward Haffey, who was a hitman hired by her husband to kill her. The 59-year-old criminal had been paid $50,000 to kill Susan. Luckily, due to her training as an A&E nurse, Susan was no stranger to self-defense. She dived at the man, tackling him against the wall. She described her adrenaline going into overdrive, and she knew this was a fight for her life. She wrestled the hammer off him and struck him in the head. She screamed at him, asking who sent him, but he wouldn't reply. She ended up grabbing him by the throat and strangling him. She then describes panicking and running to try and escape. However, as she tried to flee the house, Edward grabbed her again and started punching her in the face. She decided to bite him in the arm in case she died so that he would be linked to the crime. Luckily though, she managed to get him in a chokehold and eventually he went floppy. She grabbed the hammer and ran to her neighbour's house. It was there that she rang police, and obviously when they arrived at her house, they found the body of Edward Haffey. Police also discovered his daily planner, and in it was a note saying call Mike and Susan's husband's phone number. It transpired that the two knew each other and they were actually colleagues. A week after the attempted murder, police found Mike hiding out in Oregon. The next day, Susan filed for divorce. In 2007, Michael pleaded guilty to soliciting a murder-for-hire plot against his wife. Shockingly, he was only given 7 years in prison.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This man was found dead, wrapped inside a rug, and police believe there was no foul play involved. Husband and father of 5, Nathan Millard, was on a business trip in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when he disappeared. It was the 22nd of February 2023, and he'd been to watch a basketball game, FaceTimed his wife, and then went to Happy's Irish pub with a client. He was seen leaving the pub after 11 p.m. and was spotted on CCTV from a nearby business at 4:30 a.m. He was seen walking down the road with an unidentified person. Prior to vanishing, he was seen at the Greyhound bus station by a security guard. The security guard asked him if he was okay and if he needed help, and Nathan said he'd lost his phone. The security guard offered him a lift, but he declined. He then walked away from the bus station with the unidentified man. Between 11:30 p.m. and 4:30 a.m, police say the man Nathan was with introduced him to some other people. They apparently flagged down a substance dealer called Derek Perkins. Nathan then got into a blue Toyota with Derek and a woman. At 4:24 a.m, Nathan is seen alive on surveillance at a Circle K. At some point after this, witnesses told police that Nathan died of an overdose at a home in East Washington Street. Obviously not being aware of this, at 9 a.m, Nathan's client called police to request a welfare check on him after he didn't turn up to a meeting. That day, Nathan's phone and wallet were found several blocks from his hotel. At 11 a.m. that day, Nathan's card was used by Derek. Now, a member of the public reported smelling a foul odour coming from behind a funeral home. This caused police to head over there and discover Nathan's body. He was wrapped in plastic and a rug, and police believe this to have been done by Derek. Strangely, an autopsy report showed that there were no internal or external signs of trauma, and this led police to state that there was no foul play involved. However, police have obtained phone records from Derek which link him to the Circle K where Nathan was last seen alive. The records also link him to the place where Nathan was found. On March the 13th, police were notified of a vehicle fire. The car was a light blue Toyota, matching the description of the one linked to this case. A cadaver dog searched the vehicle and gave a positive alert to the boot of the car. This indicates that there had been a dead body in the boot of the car. At Derek's home, police also found a roll of plastic sheeting consistent with the plastic used to wrap up Nathan's body. Derek has been charged with unlawful disposal of remains, criminal damage to property, obstruction of justice, and failure to seek assistance. Police are also looking for 2 women in connection to this case, and Nathan's death has been ruled an accident. This family's doorbell rang on Christmas Eve. What happened next was just about as horrific as you could ever imagine. This is the case of the Santa Claus killer. It was Christmas Eve 2008, and the Ortega family were excited to celebrate. They lived in Covina in California in a quiet neighborhood. Joseph and Alice Ortega had a fairly big family with 5 adult children and also some grandchildren. They'd invited them all round on the day in question. The festivities were in full swing and the family were playing a big game of poker. However, at 11:30 p.m, suddenly the doorbell rang. All hell was about to break loose. Stood at the door was a man dressed in a Santa costume. It wasn't long before police got frantic calls from neighbours. They shrieked, "Come immediately, they're burning down someone's house." Others reported hearing gunfire. An officer described what they found at the scene as being apocalyptic. Bruce Pardo was the man that arrived at the house at that fateful evening. In 2004, he'd met his future wife, Sylvia, who was the adult daughter of the Ortegas. They married 2 years later, but due to financial issues, they did separate. Sylvia had 3 children from a previous relationship, and there is speculation that Bruce may have lied about having a child from another woman. In 2008, Bruce was ordered to pay spousal support, and he apparently told his friends he felt his ex was taking him to the cleaners. To make matters worse, Bruce was then sacked from his job. The divorce was finalised just a week before the horrific violence that would occur. He showed up to his former in-laws' house that evening dressed as Santa. 8-year-old Katrina answered the door and he immediately opened fire. He shot the little girl and started spraying bullets at all of the other family members inside. With him, he actually had a gift-wrapped package, which was a homemade flamethrower. He used it to set the house on fire. Bruce's ex-wife, her parents, her 2 brothers and their wives, her sister and her nephew were all killed. Luckily, some did manage to escape to a neighbour's house. These were Sylvia's sister Letitia, her husband and Sylvia's 8-year-old daughter. Meanwhile, Bruce escaped in a rental car. He actually had an escape plan and he had on him a plane ticket and also cash. However, during the incident, he had sustained 3rd-degree burns, so he decided to drive to his brother's house instead. His brother came home from a Christmas party that day to find a horrendous scene himself. He was met by the body of his brother on the floor in a pool of blood with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In Bruce's car, they found the Santa costume, which had been booby-trapped. It was due to set off 200 rounds of ammunition and set fire. The car did actually explode, but luckily no one was hurt. Letitia and her husband took in Sylvia's daughter and have worked hard to help her come to terms with what happened. Letitia has also really tried her best to make sure that Christmas remains a happy, special occasion.
These are the worst deaths imaginable, and this one is just gut-turning. This was 27-year-old Roy Jaggers. He was a fun person who liked to do a lot of things and everybody adored him. But he would occasionally babysit for one of his neighbors, and this is what led to all of this. She is 27-year-old Heather Pate, who you see on the screen right now. So she got the idea that Roy was hurting one of her children, but this was never proven. Roy's mother even said that she knows her boy and he would never do this. But in Heather's head, she believed it and she was going to take care of it herself. And at 6:23 a.m. on August 21st, 2021, 911 was called and somebody reported a dead body at the bottom of a cliff. They were able to identify the body off fingerprints and it was 27-year-old Roy Jaggers. And he appeared to be absolutely mangled. And this is what happened. Heather lured Roy to her house, and waiting for him there was Heather and her 37-year-old boyfriend named Kevin. And the 2 of them then started beating Roy extremely bad in front of her children. They then handcuffed him and threw him in a vehicle and then met up with Heather's ex-boyfriend, who was 37-year-old named Brad. The 3 of them then brought him to this wasteland of a desert right here, and they then started torturing Roy for hours on end. They used a blowtorch on him which burned a lot of his flesh as well as continuing beating him, and they then started hitting him with an axe which just absolutely mangled him. And the worst part about this is, he was still alive throughout all of this. They then loaded him back up in the vehicle and drove him 25 miles away to a place called Cathedral Canyon. And they were not done yet. They then forced him to the edge of a cliff. They forced him to take off all of his clothing and then gave him no other choice other than walk off the cliff. Roy Jaggers then walked off the cliff and landed in the canyon below. And the sad and disgusting thing is, he still wasn't dead. The three of them then went down to his body, and Brad pulled out a gun and fired several shots into his body, which finally ended up killing Roy Jaggers. Within 36 hours, the three disgusting human beings that did this were arrested. They were all charged with the murder of Roy Jaggers, and they are actively seeking the death penalty for Brad, since he fired the killing bullets. Heather was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, and Kevin was sentenced to 10 years to life in prison. The fact that these people actually have a chance to get out of prison before they die, especially because they made an innocent man walk off a cliff in an attempt to kill him. Can you imagine being in the position that Roy Jaggers was in? Being brutally beaten and then taken to a desert to be burned and beaten even more. And then the people that are doing this to you make you walk off a cliff. I honestly can't imagine what Roy was going through, and I feel so bad for him and his family. May Roy Jaggers rest in peace.
This is James Henry Hammond, an American politician and one of the worst pedophiles in U.S. history. This story is absolutely sick and disgusting. So James Henry Hammond was born in the year 1807 in South Carolina. So before we get into the essay that happened and his pedophilia, we have to talk about James's pro-slavery stance. So James was the governor of South Carolina from 1842 until 1844. And he was elected to the U.S. Senate from 1857 to 1860. James was a Democrat and popularized the phrase, "Cotton is king." These are some quotes from James. You can read these and pause them. They're absolutely horrific. Throughout his life, he owned over 300 slaves, and he treated them absolutely horribly. So if you think the story can't get worse, it definitely does. Through marriage, James was related to this guy, Wade Hampton II. He was a famous soldier in the War of 1812, and he was a stand-up guy. James's sister-in-law, Anne Fitzsimmons, was married to Wade. But eventually, Wade would learn about the dark things James was doing with his daughters. As it turns out, James Henry Hammond had SA'd all 4 of Wade's daughters. Yes, James assaulted 4 of his nieces who were all teenagers at the time. So when Wade learned about this, he obviously made this public. This was a massive scandal at the time because James Henry Hammond was the governor of South Carolina, but it didn't matter. Nothing happened to him, and eventually he was elected to the Senate. James's own wife would leave him eventually because he was SAing his own slaves. He assaulted one of his slaves, Sally, when she was 18 years old, and he assaulted her own daughter, Louisa, when she was only 12. So if you can't tell by now, James was obviously a piece of shit. And another sad thing to come out of the story was that James's own nieces, who he SA'd when they were teenagers, never got married because their social prospects were destroyed by the scandal. Yeah, this meant that James was able to go on to the Senate after he served as the governor when the scandal broke, and his own nieces were left for nothing. Now let's fast forward to the 1900s and the 1980s specifically, when his diaries, Secret and Sacred, were published. Yes, James Henry Hammond wrote all these things down in his personal diary. When describing the assault of his own teenage nieces, this is what James Henry Hammond wrote down. Warning, this is disturbing. He wrote, "Here were 4 lovely creatures, each contending for my love, claiming the greater share of it as due to her superior devotion to me, all of them rushing on every occasion into my arms and covering me with kisses, lolling on my lap, pressing their bodies almost into mine, wreathing their limbs with mine, encountering warmly every portion of my frame and permitting my hands to stray unchecked over every part of them and to rest without the slightest shrinking from it, in the most secret and sacred regions, and all this for a period of more than 2 years continuously." These are his own teenage nieces this politician was talking about. And to this day, this school in South Carolina is named after him. It is a pre-K through 12th grade school named the Hammond School. Absolutely disgusting. Follow for part 3 of the series. This is one of the most disturbed killers in American history, and you probably don't know his story. This is Maxim Gelman, the 2011 spree killer from New York City. and his crime spree sent shockwaves throughout all of America. All this began on February 11th, 2011, when Maxim stabbed his stepfather, Alexander, over 55 times to death. His mother was home at the time and he spared her, but he stole her car and sped off with it. If you want to hear all of the reasons why Maxim committed these murders and his crazy methodology behind all of it, you can listen to my wife and I's podcast, Murder in America, on all streaming platforms. It's our latest episode. After stabbing his stepfather, Maxim took off and he was on a path of revenge. Maxim at the time thought that he was being trailed by government agencies and that he was a wanted man, but the reality of it was that he wasn't. He even stated that he wanted to take down rats, but there were no rats that were testifying against him. Maxim then visited the house of a girl he knew, Yelena Bolchenko. When he found that Yelena wasn't there, he stabbed her mother, Anna, there to death. After murdering Yelena's mom, Anna, he left the crime scene. He hid out for a few hours, but he returned at 4:00 p.m. that day. And when he returned, he found Yelena, Anna's daughter, standing outside on the phone. He then got out of his car, confronted Yelena. She took off running, but he chased her down and stabbed her 11 times in broad daylight in front of a bunch of onlookers. Maxim then sped away from the crime scene in the stolen car, crashed into another car, stabbed the driver of that car 3 times, and hijacked that vehicle. Later on, while Maxim was speeding through the streets of New York, he hit 62-year-old Stephen Tenenbaum. Stephen had just been crossing the street. Maxim struck the pedestrian, and eventually he sadly died of his injuries. But it was at this point when Maxim decided that he wanted to enact his full plan. He wanted to hijack a New York City subway car. And let me tell you, when you get into the details of these crimes, it is absolutely insane how this guy thought about all of it, but again, listen to the podcast, you get the whole story. So at this point, Maxim gets onto a subway car in New York City, and he's headed to the most busy part of the city. And this guy is armed and dangerous. His face is plastered across all of New York City's newspapers and their news, and people are on the lookout for him. All the NYPD knows that Maxim Gelman is a threat to public safety. And that's when Maxim runs into this guy, Joe Lozito. Apparently, Maxim was hopping train to train, and he had been banging on doorways of the subways trying to be let in. And 2 cops had even seen Maxim at the door and had refused to let him in, but they knew that it was Maxim. Eventually, Maxim got into one of these trains, and that's when he confronted Joe. Maxim ended up stabbing Joe a number of times in the face and in the back of the head. But eventually, Joe was the hero, and he was the one that was able to bring Maxim Gelman down to the ground without the assistance of the New York Police Department. The New York Police Department lied and stated that they were the ones that took Gelman down. But Joe was the one who took the killer down all along. On the latest episode of our show about this crime, we actually interviewed Joe Lozito, heard his side of the story, and wow, does he drop some bombshells. Just search Murder in America on any streaming platform and you'll find our podcast.